And be sure that the Lord can forgive all. The Lord will forgive all, but only if you listen to his voice and repent. Father Mokoena loudly declared, raising his hands up to the sunny sky while he preached, standing on the slightly elevated position offered by a pristinely white gazebo in the middle of a public park. Sit down with your Lord and listen for the path he offers you, the path that will lead to your redemption, and then follow it like he has told you to, like only he can tell you to, and find your way into paradise, leaving the sins of your past behind you. The father's commune was loosely assembled around him, listening to his sermon in reverence and pleasant admiration, while his words of wisdom took hold in them. Those most devoutly stood next to the gazebo, with their hands folded and their gazes lowered. Many others, however, had spread themselves out across the amenities of the park, either finding places for themselves on public seating, or simply lounging in the surrounding grass and scenery while they enjoyed the sermon. Jeremy also sat on the grass, a bit off to the side so that he barely saw the father's face, as the old man's mighty voice easily rang out across the entire park. His eyes weren't on the preceding sermon. Instead, his gaze was affixed to his own hand, as it idly ripped out handsful of the grass that grew in between him and the rest of his reformed brothers and sisters. He crushed the plant's corpses between his fingers, feeling the life drain out of them in the slightly viscous fluid that stuck to his fingers, and released a rich, earthen smell. Ultimately, he rolled the remains up into a ball and proceeded to move it back and forth in his hand, always keeping his eye on it as he took in the father's words passively. Kim sat to his right, Trixie to his left. Just a pace behind him, Jim was chatting with Wendy, while Fred sat a bit further back, leaning back onto his hands while staring up at the sky. Together they sat in the grass, rays of sunlight shining down on them, surrounded by their new community. It was so peaceful. With a quivering hand, Jeremy crushed the ball of grass and ultimately allowed it to drop back down to its still living relatives. He had read somewhere that blades of grass could somehow detect if other blades close to them were damaged, that the earthen smell it released when it died, which so many people greatly enjoyed, was some kind of signal for those around it. He wasn't sure how true any of that was, but he did wonder if the individual leaves felt any fear, as a crushed, mangled ball made of the mortal remains of their own kin fell into their midst. Absent-mindedly, he rubbed his palm along the knee of his pant leg, wiping the smell of botanic murder from his own skin, even though he knew it would still cling to him for a while, no matter how hard and long he would try to wipe it away. It would cling to him like any wrongdoing, every misstep he had made in his life, of which there really was no shortage. Our way to the Lord is for us all to find, and it is unique as each and every one of us, Father Mokoena loudly proclaimed, still raising his hands to the sky in praise with each word he uttered. Of course, that makes it hard to find the right way, and the way into paradise is not always an easy one to find. But be assured, all of you, that there is always a right path to take. The Lord grants it to each of his children. He leaves none behind. You only need to be willing to walk it, steadfast with your head held high, and he will await you at the end with his arms held wide. Jeremy took the words in and exhaled deeply. He pressed his eyes shut tight. By now he could speak along with the next part. And follow not those false leaders who would drag you into the swamp, promising their swift ways to salvation or leading you away from your righteous path so that you may lose your way. Lose sight of the road the Lord hath bestowed upon you, blinded by the shining splendor of their halo. He quietly mumbled the words that Mokoena was calling out, matching pace with the sermon as it was being said. It is easy to get lost when following those who share God's light. Rewarded for their own deeds, they think they know the right way and can show it to anyone, and it is tempting to follow them when they shine almost as bright as your destination. But your path can only ever be your own, and following that, not meant for you, can only lead to the abyss. He bit his lips after saying the last words, and he could feel the eyes of the others on him, drawn in by the sudden mumble of his voice. He squeezed his eyes shut even tighter. How long have we followed false light? he quietly wondered to himself. A single tear ran down his cheek as the face of young Jory flashed through his mind. The way he had beamed at him whenever they had come together after the confessions. A ripping sound rang out, causing him to open his eyes. With it, he suddenly held yet another clump of grass in his hand. However, this time, it was not made of individual blades. His hand had closed and ripped an entire patch of the carpeting greenery from the soil, roots and all, leaving a barren spot that stuck out like a sore thumb in the midst of the pristine meadow. He swallowed heavily before huffing out a single sob. He didn't dare think about it, but he also couldn't help it. He had allowed it to happen. He allowed it to happen because he thought they were... Before he knew it, Jeremy had collapsed forward, the clump of grass, dirt and roots still grasped in his hand, while his arms and elbows hit the ground. He buried his face in them, hiding it away from the blinding light of the sun, while tears began to freely flow. "I'm sorry," he pressed out, against his better judgment. To most around him, it would seem like he was talking to no one in particular. However, those who were with him knew exactly for whose forgiveness he begged. "I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I didn't know." As he lost his voice, more and more into the increasingly incoherent pleas, he subconsciously heard how the sermon stopped. Meanwhile, the grass close to him rustled a bit, and soon enough he felt the hands of Kim and Trixie on him, clearly trying to provide some gentle comfort. However, before he could even begin to feel anything about it, the hands were quite suddenly and quickly pulled away again, as the sound of approaching footsteps rang out across the now very, very quiet park. "And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others," a familiar, strict voice ordered him, as his owner came to halt, not even a step away. As the man stood over Jeremy, his form was blocking out the sun's harsh light, giving him a merciful moment of not being taken by its warm rays. "Have you forgotten the teachings already, Brother Mankey?" Jeremy sobbed one more time. Much as he wished to, he couldn't get himself completely back under control right away. I can't," he pushed out with a wet voice, his tears still running against his will. I need his forgiveness. He must..." The shifting of light shining through his lids alone informed Jeremy that the man in front of him was crouching down. "He must?" Alexander Page wondered, his voice as strict as it was performatively curious. "Quite the demand to make of a mere man, of a mere child, especially as there is only one who may judge you, and thus only one who may forgive." A rustle of grass indicated that Alexander was shifting his posture yet again, and it seemed like he was kneeling down, judging purely by the sound. "You must leave the performative flaunting of your virtue that the misguided have taught you behind yourself, brother," Page said, in a now more calm and encouraging voice. "You will not find your redemption among those you wronged, those who have no obligation to forgive you." Suddenly, Jeremy felt his still clenched hands being grabbed. Slowly, his hands were lifted, his arms and head going along with them, as Alexander's gentle paw raised his hidden features back into the light. "Your way to paradise is between you and God alone," Page told him, keeping his grasp on Jeremy's hands tight, as his pale blue eyes looked into Jeremy's watery gaze with a calm sublimity. "Tell me, what is the path you see before yourself?" Jeremy sniffed heavily and coughed a single time to clear his airways. He stared at the young man's face, but his gaze became somewhat vacant as his mind drifted off. Drifted to those he had followed for so many years. Drifted to Jory. Gently, he pulled his hands free from Alexander's hands. Then, with his left hand, he gently ran across the back of his right forearm. After just a bit of gentle rubbing, bright spots of luminescence sparked up on his skin, as the sins of his past, that were now etched into his very essence, reawakened at the stimulation, gently glowing in pale blues and greens. "I can't allow it to ever happen again," he exhaled breathlessly, as the unnatural spots on his skin taunted him. "Can't allow people like them to ever hurt anyone else." Alexander slowly raised his hand up. Carefully and slowly, he lowered it onto Jeremy's shoulder, giving a gentle, comforting squeeze. "If that is your way," he said, in a tone that radiated the same illustrious nature that his entire demeanor exuded, as Jeremy's tears slowly ran dry, not to re-emerge for a very, very long time. "Then I will be your guide." Back in the present, Jeremy's cheeks suddenly felt the almost forgotten sensation of wet lines trickling down over them. His eyes went wide as he realized what was happening, and his gaze shot down to try and see. However, it found nothing but blurriness. In a jolt, he attempted to reach out to his face, but found that the restraints on his limbs still held more than firm, leaving him stuck, unable to do anything but feel the tears flow down his face. He didn't want this. He didn't want them, but he couldn't help it. Those words. Those damn words. Even now, they were ingrained so deeply within him. "James forgives you. As do I." Forgiveness. Damned forgiveness. He didn't want forgiveness. He didn't need forgiveness. Not from the likes of them. But still, his body. No. Not even his mind. His soul itself reacted to those words. It gripped for them and held on to them as tightly as it could, clinging to them for dear life. For the enfant brisé, forgiveness was not just a word. It was not just a concept. It was everything. Forgiveness was what allowed you to live, what allowed you to be around others. Asking for forgiveness was as natural as bidding good day. No matter if it was an intrusion into their space, a disagreement with words, or even an impure thought you had about someone, you naturally asked them for forgiveness for it. Performative. That was what everyone in the Church of the Failed Saviour had called it. Guide Page, especially. However, it was their way of life, was his way of life, for a very long time. And no matter how deeply he thought he had shed it, those words, spoken as the first ones after she had learned his name, it had touched something. She was scum. Scum like the people who had taken jewelry from him. Scum that had made the poor boy's life hell. Scum that deserved the worst, just like her brood. But she knew what to say, and not only that, but she said it unprompted. The scum left in his past had not gone with dignity, had not gone with forgiveness. They had thrashed and screamed and cursed everyone but themselves as they were taken away. But she didn't. She stood strong. As he looked at her through his watery eyes, his tears distorted the lights in the room, bathing her warping black silhouette into a bright sheen of light. "Lose sight of the road the Lord had bestowed upon you, blinded by the shining splendor of their halo," it echoed through his mind. A sound escaped his throat in a deep groan. Without a tongue to speak, he couldn't form the words that he wished to bring out. However, the fact that he had made a sound at all suddenly caught her attention. So far he had locked himself away, like they had locked him away in this room. He had locked himself away from their influence. He knew he could not allow himself to fall to scum like them again. To him, they had to be but sows for the slaughter. "It is a dangerous thing indeed, such a saint," he heard echo in his mind. But although the words had been said in warning, and he had internalized them over the months of torture he had put himself through to stand against that very danger, suddenly only one of the words actually stuck in his mind. As he looked upon the Admiral, the glistening light still played with his vision through the tears in his eyes. He could think only one thing. Saint. He released another deep groan, then a wheeze. He vaguely saw the Admiral's face turn to one of concern, as she lifted her hand to press it against the barrier, separating the air they breathed. Sweet Jesus, what had he done? Zishedii released a long sigh and stretched extensively as he finally stepped out of the conference he had confined himself to for the last couple of hours. Overall, the meeting with a squishy bunch of intergalactic traders had ended Acceptably successful, given the somewhat bad base position that the Miat had to start negotiations from, considering the years of social and commercial isolation of his planet he had to work with. It took quite a bit of finesse, but eventually he managed to finagle the bits and pieces of leverage that he did have into a solid enough foundation to jump off from, ultimately ending in agreements which would ensure that the near future of Dunama would contain a lot more exotic woods to play around with, which, admittedly, wasn't a huge priority or anything. But after successfully closing quite a few of the more essential deals, Zishedii did feel like he deserved at least one for himself. Still, through the way his joints crackled as he stretched them out, he deduced that maybe it was time to take a bit of a break now. He had been jumping from negotiation to negotiation for quite a bit now, and... The councilman's ear twitched, as he became fully aware that he had not stepped out to the exact same security detail he had left outside earlier, with those who had been there previously eagerly interrogating a single new arrival. "You can switch shifts in the bit, I was just heading back anyway," he informed in his native language, rolling his shoulders a bit more, while already looking forward to a comfortable bed to fall into. His newly arrived conspecific snapped up and looked at him with minor excitement, his ears lifting up straight. "That's good to hear, sir," he replied, with an expression of slight relief. "Returning to the ship will likely be the best course of action. I'm not sure if you were informed yet, but we are experiencing some concerning complications." Lifting an eyebrow, Zishedii half tilted his tail to the side as he took that information in, quickly activating his personal assistant, which he had politely turned off during the negotiations, and checking just what he had missed now. Sure enough, things had indeed gotten concerning. "Yes, I'm not looking to be the next one to get locked away," he confirmed, after he had a basic overview of the situation. "Let's move." His security didn't seem to have any objections to that, as they quickly began to usher their ward along, likely just as eager to get out of the possible line of fire as he was. As they moved, Zishedii waved the newest arrival among the soldiers closer to himself, in order to get some quick words in while they made their way back. "So, from what I understand, they are about to tear that door down?" he asked, to which the soldier quickly nodded. "Yes. They're just quickly going door to door, making sure nobody will think it's another attack on the station when the explosion comes," the soldier confirmed. "However, the humans are getting antsy, not knowing if their leader is okay or not, so I don't think they are going to waste too much time on that. I would say chances are they already blew it up, but I think we would have likely heard that." Zishedii thought about that for a moment. "Right, the quickest way will likely take us right past the detention," he mused. The building they had taken over to detain people had deliberately been chosen to be relatively close to one of their frequently used airlocks, just in case. As fate wanted it, it would also be the one Zishedii would now use to get off the station. That left the question if it would be the better decision to avoid that area, or if it would be prudent to check on the Admiral's condition himself, if he was in the area anyway. Tricky indeed. One that was likely safer, the other would allow him to act quicker. Decisions. Movement caught his eyes in the corner of his vision, and Zishedii stopped in place as he registered the point position of his security detail, raising her hand in a fist. The entire escort froze in place, weapons defensively at the ready, as all their gazes followed what the leading figure was seeing. They all stared for a moment before carefully exchanging a few glances between each other. "Do they know that is the wrong prison they are protesting?" one of the soldiers quietly asked into the group, earning a few shrugs and mumbles as a reply. Although there was nothing strictly differentiating them from normal people, the strange subpopulation of the galaxy that had made it their life's purpose to make the biggest asses possible of themselves, by showing just how little they understood nature, always had a certain aura about them that made it possible to tell them apart from other randomly forming crowds. True, the signs they were often waving around were definitely a big help in identifying them. However, in this case, Zishedii already knew who they were long before he had spotted any of the wave symbols, demonizing him or his kind, for the way nature had equipped them to survive. And the soldier was right. This certainly was not the detention facility that their precious leader was being held in. In fact, the people who were being detained in this specific facility were just about the furthest thing from the kinds of beings they wished to protect and advocate for, which didn't make their presence here any less strange, and possibly concerning. They were still a good distance away right now, but even from here, Zishedii could tell that the protesters were already making themselves quite busy with bothering the humans who were in the process of freeing their admiral from her uncertain confinement. And, by the look of things, the primate soldiers found themselves unpleasantly outnumbered as they tried to corral the assembling crowd away from the secured door that needed to be opened. Apparently a losing battle at the moment. "Better take the long way around before one of those idiots gets himself shot," the leading soldier of the councilman's escort soon decided, making the decision of where to go for him, as she indicated for everyone to turn and go another way. "Right," Zishedii confirmed, and followed in the advised direction, "though perhaps we should make sure this situation is properly reported. We wouldn't want to leave our allies to fend for themselves in case any more malfunctions in our communications are to occur." Using the long way, it would probably be a bit until they reached the relative safety of their ship, so there wasn't a lot of time to waste. In the meantime, the humans a few blocks down were doing their darn best to contain themselves from raining righteous hellfire down on the ignorant assholes who had seemingly decided to shed all of their survival instincts ever since they went off their ideological deep end. "I told you to stand back!" one of the corporals supporting the ongoing rescue effort stated loudly, his grip on his weapon tightening as he began to lose his patience with the belligerent Estaxai he found himself faced with, who was in turn backed up by a whole gaggle of equally uncooperative core welders. He was already in a bad mood. The constant rotation of guard duty, as they tried to keep this entire huge station under control with limited personnel, left him exhausted and irritable. And that wasn't even mentioning that the Admiral was quite possibly dead or dying within that damn prison, and there wasn't a damn thing they could do about it as long as these idiots insisted in standing too close to that damn door. "Or what?" the shimmering goat lizard replied indignantly, building himself up to his full height that easily doubled that of the human. "What are you gonna do? Shoot me? For standing here? Pah! You really think you have any authority to order me around? Go ahead then! Show us what you are made of!" The giant shook himself, making the fur-like plumage that covered his body rustle as large parts of it stood up in a clear threat display. He would have likely also shown off his horn to his perceived opponent had the Deathworlder not stood so much shorter than he himself, was that trying to use the head weapons would really be more laughable than imposing. The corporal inhaled deeply, doing his best to keep his temper in check. They were probably coming close to having grounds for arrest here, but... He glanced around at the riled-up crowd that had suddenly converged in this place as if called in by some mysterious attractant. They had a good-sized squad of soldiers and specialists here, but trying to arrest all of those nutcases would still hardly be possible. Not to mention how long it would take, and time that they quite possibly did not have. "Sir, we are about to make use of tactical explosives here," he informed, doing his best not to speak through gritted teeth. "You will need to keep a certain distance for your own safety, as we cannot guarantee it if you do not stay within the established secure perimeter." He gestured towards the station's floor a few measures behind the unheld core welders, where the specialists had already used tape to visualize the acceptable distance everyone needed to keep from the blast. While the explosives they were about to use were extremely precise and only operated in a very controlled manner, they were still fucking explosives, and you did not want to stand too close in case the door was a little less sturdy than they expected, and decided to catapult a piece of itself out to share the love of the blast. However, although the warning was definitely genuine, the Escalation seemed rather unimpressed. "Pah!" he scoffed, and shook his massive head once again, before tilting it to zero one of its rectangular pupils in on the human. "And is that supposed to be my problem? We're all just supposed to bend the knee around your wishes because you want to set off a bomb in our home?" Agreeing calls and murmurs came from the other giants flanking the man, none of which sounded at all perceptive to the reality of the situation. "The door is malfunctioning," the corporal tried to explain one more time. He really wished he could simply reach for harsher measures, but which harsher measures were there to reach for, which would not make the situation much worse right now? Honestly, part of him wanted to just let them get up close and personal with the blast if they wanted to so badly. Alas, he knew that wasn't an option either, not with the galaxy watching their every move. People are likely trapped inside and we cannot get a read on the internal systems at all. We have to get a door open post-haste in case life support for the inside has been cut off. He looked up at the core warders with a tinge of hope. These were aware people, capable of empathy. They at least had to understand that part, right? However, empathy had its limits. And it just randomly malfunctioned? Cut off from a system out of nowhere? Well, sounds to me like maybe your pet monster had enough of listening to orders, now that it got what it wanted out of you. The SSI rebuffed, with a mocking tone that was as cold as ice. Where's the problem anyway? It's all part of nature, isn't it? Or does the narrative change when you suddenly find yourself staring down a bigger maw? His eyes widening, the corporal's fingers turned white as they pressed against the metal of his gun. How fucking dare? How could they be so... Corporal, is there a problem? A far more professional voice loudly asked, and footsteps announced the approach of the captain leading this whole operation. Finding himself in the view of his superior officer, the corporal exhaled slowly, his grip on his gun gradually relaxing. He turned to face the captain. Sir, these people... he began to say while standing at attention. However, as he began to report, the assembled core warders facing him released mocking noises of amusement. Ah, look at that! The SSI specifically taunted and leaned down a bit, bringing his head closer to the level of the human. Just like I thought, the scary hunter's all tame when a louder roar shows up. Suddenly he's not so tough. Since he wasn't looking their way, the corporal could momentarily only guess at what was happening, as the captain's eyes widened while he looked up at something happening next to the corporal's head. However, before either of them had the necessary time to fully react, the corporal suddenly felt something hard hit against his head, forcing it to the side in a blunt impact that reverberated through his skull and left a pulsating soreness banging against his temple. In a split-second reaction, the soldier shot around, knowing only that he had to defend himself, headache or not. As he turned, he could see the SSI's smug face, even as he lifted his weapon up, pointing directly at the center of mass. Get the hell back! He yelled out, while his captain hastily stepped to the side. I'm not telling you again! There he goes barking again! The SSI kept on mocking him, seemingly emboldened that he had been able to lay hands on the corporal. It's almost cut! The core warder's taunting was momentarily shut up as he tried to take a demonstrative step towards the human, likely to show that he was unafraid. However, with the barrier of physical violence being broken, even by what had likely just been a flick against the head, the apparently aggressive move earned him a quick warning shot. The bang echoed across the crowd. Immediately, weapons were raised by all human operatives around. Meanwhile, the entire crowd flinched heavily, many keeping their heads down low on instinct, while those less good at surviving actually made themselves taller to look around for the noise's source. The SSI on the receiving end of the warning stood shock-stunned for a brief moment, right after the bullet had zipped past his head. He blinked as he realized what had happened, his long ears flicking once they processed the gust of wind that the projectile had carried along with it. As he lowered his face to look at the corporal, and at the gun pointed in his direction, the giant's expression fell into a deep darkness. He still looked surprised, but also absolutely indignant. Did you just shoot at me? He asked. His voice almost toneless, and his wide eyes quivered as they stared down at the human in utter disbelief. That was a warning, the corporal informed him. His own voice hardened as well, though it was still slightly shaky from the adrenaline of the situation. Now stand back or I will shoot for real. The exercise breathing got a lot heavier, and many of the other giants backing him up gave him rather concerned looks, while also glaring in fury at the Deathworlders. You shot at me, the SSI said, as if he was still coming to terms with that reality, though his voice developed more and more of a furious quiver the more he seemed to become aware of it. You shot at me! You dare try to harm me, you... In his rage, the SSI built himself back up to his full height and pulled his arm back, raising it above the crowd's heads in what was clearly winding up for a strike. Blood spattered, spraying over the crowd as another loud bang rang out. The giant's winding up arm was thrown back further as he tipped over with a pained scream. The corporal's eyes widened as he watched the giant fall with a large wound in his side, slowly spreading dark blood over his shimmering blue plumage. The shot hadn't been well aimed, He had simply pulled the trigger. It was his training. It had happened automatically. The dude was twice his size. A serious swing from him could have... "Watch out!" he suddenly heard in his ear, snapping him back to reality right as he was grabbed by a strap at his shoulder and yanked back, out of the way of a heavy tail club strike that was aimed right for his head, blowing some of his hair out of place as it barely missed his mark. Pulling him along with one arm, the captain raised his sidearm with the other, firing a suppressing shot in the direction of the chorusdilge, who had so brazenly swung at his soldier. The shot harmlessly grazed the side of the turtle's shell, but was at least enough to make him momentarily reconsider trying again. With shouts, yells, trumpets, and roars, the already riled-up crowd whipped itself into a frenzy as it split into two parts, those running for dear life, and those looking to take this further. As he was being pulled back, the corporal couldn't quite believe it, as he realized what this was about to turn into. He had only acted as he had been trained. They wouldn't listen. They wouldn't back off. And now... "Pull yourself together, man!" the captain suddenly yelled at him, before shoving him to stand on his own again. The corporal shook his head, pulled back into the moment as he raised his gun. Together, he and the captain backed up further to form a line with their comrades, firing occasional warning shots to tell the encroaching crowd to back down. However, it did not seem like they were planning to. "Sir?" Ensign Shaw called out to her commander, as something on their sensors finally changed after a surprisingly long wait, considering the message they had received. "We detect hyperspace stretches entering the galactic plane close to our coordinates." Keown sat up, his face hardening as his hands clenched the armrests of his seat. "How many?" he asked, even as his gaze shot up to the screen of his own, which would give him the answer. His eyes widened at what he saw. "Currently counting 15, sir," Shaw announced, and without needing him to tell her, she already hit the all-hands-prepare-for-combat alarm, even if they had already been prepared for hostilities ever since the first warning had come in. "And they are large." Commander Keown couldn't help but sit in shock and awe for a moment, as the rain of light came down on them. In the typical amazing display of colours, hyperspace stretches pierced down from the intergalactic void, dropping ship after ship right into their territory. With the 3 ships they had sent to defend the satellite, they found themselves outnumbered 5-1. And those ships there clearly weren't pushovers. He could only imagine the number of fighters they had on board. One of his screens flared up, as the trail of tears sent out a message across all channels. "You have unpermittedly entered Orion Alliance space," it read. "If you do not immediately identify yourself and power down, this will be seen as a hostile invasion." Keown sucked in a deep breath, his chest expanding as they were once again left waiting for an answer. Then he released it all in one long blow. He lifted his eyes, once more taking in the fusion satellite's impressive sight. Then he pushed himself to his feet. "Everybody, pick a god and pray," he announced loudly. "We cannot let the satellite fall. It must not fall. Do you understand me?" Immediately, like out of one single mouth, it echoed back from the entire bridge. "Yes, sir!"